Welcome to my first live subscriber Q&A session. Noting that this is my first live Q&A session on Substack, so bear with me while I sort of learn the ropes here. But this is pretty exciting, and I think it's great that Substack has sort of given authors, publishers, content creators the ability to use tools like this. So I hope you find this Q&A session informative. It's sort of just going to be off the cuff. I have some questions that I've received from my audience, whether that's on Substack or on X, as well as some questions that I've just kind of not necessarily come up with, but they're common kind of questions I get regarding endurance training, nutrition, endurance exercise in general, marathon training. So I've added those to my list. I think this will be kind of a fun discussion, and I'm excited to share with you all some tips that will hopefully be helpful, things that I found to be worthwhile, things that I've had success with for marathon training, and maybe some things that I haven't found as much success with. So I think to start, and I think this will be separate from, I'm planning on doing a whole breakdown of a Boston Marathon race recap sometime soon. So I'm gonna not talk a lot about that today, about the Boston Marathon that just happened this previous Monday. I'm going to try to save that for another time. Of course, I may reference that throughout this Q&A, but I will be doing sort of a breakdown on that, maybe a specific Q&A session on the Boston Marathon and how that went. It went pretty well, but I'll leave the details about that for another post. So to get started today, I think one of the questions that I receive a lot, just regarding my training philosophy, how I choose to structure my training on a week-to-week basis, whether that's running or riding, and I won't go into the very specific details on how I prescribe my training intensities, heart rate, pace, things like that, but just kind of overall my training structure because I do think it is a bit unorthodox maybe. So I run 5 days a week, at least this training block. I chose to run 5 days per week and ride the bike 2 days per week. So there were 2 days every single week where I was not running, I was riding on the bike. And my approach to that kind of stems from a long string of injuries that I have been probably dealing with for the past like 5 to 10 years. Every time I seem to ramp up my mileage too much, or maybe do too much intensity, or often a combination of the two, I seem to get injured, and those often are sort of bone related injuries, bone stress injuries, stress reaction, stress fracture. And so I've had to iterate on my approach to running over the years, given that I want to try to run a high volume. It sometimes is hard for me to do that. And so I've tried running 6 days per week. I've tried running 7 days per week on, just doing 70 to 60 to 70 miles per week. And that hasn't seemed to work out well. I seem to get injured even doing that approach, running less miles than usual. So this training block, I decided, why not? What if I just run 5 days a week, but keep my mileage sort of the same? And that approach has tended to work. It worked for my marathon prep for Indianapolis last year. I was actually only running 4 days per week as opposed to five, and I was cycling 3 days a week. That allowed me to reach a peak mileage of about 60 to 70 miles during that build. And so for Boston, I wanted to try something different, maybe, increase my mileage a little bit. And so I did 5 days of running per week. I pushed my mileage up to about 75 to 85 miles a week and was injury free throughout the entire training block. Now, I say that that's an unorthodox approach because a lot of people, I mean, doing 75 to 85 miles per week on 5 days of running, that means you got to squeeze a lot of miles into those days when you are running. I tend to prefer that approach. I think, I like doing the high mileage days as opposed to stretching that mileage out over, say, 6 to 7 days. And again, I think that there's something to the fact that I'm taking 2 full days off every single week that's somehow helping me avoid injury in one way or another. I think you're just getting basically 48 hours in between runs twice per week, and I think that's allowing my body to recover, recuperate, and kind of regenerate what it needs. I've tended to feel better on all of my runs since implementing this approach, and I kind of encourage it for a lot of runners who are maybe trying to experiment with something new. Maybe they're injury prone. I really find that I had just more energy to give to all of my runs because of those two quote unquote recovery days. And I call them recovery days because, again, I'm cycling for 90 minutes to 2.5 hours on each of those days, and I'm using the Zwift ride. So basically, it's just an indoor cycling setup, virtual riding environment for people who aren't familiar with that. But yeah, so getting a decent amount of volume on the bike. Another question that I always get is, do you think that the biking is it just serving as recovery, or is it helping you in some other way? Is it actually helping like improve your aerobic capacity? And I think it's both. So obviously the bike is low impact, and when I get off the bike, you might be tired, obviously. Riding for 2.5 hours, sometimes pretty intense, can leave you pretty tired. But I get off the bike feeling my legs feel definitely refreshed, but I felt like I got a good aerobic stimulus. You can do intervals on the bike a few times per week. Not that I think that you should. You have to keep some of it easy. But you can do intervals on the bike a few times per week, and it doesn't give you the damage or the kind of musculoskeletal strain that running does. And so I found that I'm sort of able to get fitter 2 days per week without loading my body like I would going out for, say, a 60 to 90-minute run. So that was my approach for this whole 12-week Boston training block: 5 days per week of running, 2 days per week on the bike. In terms of how I structured that, it was I never ran more than 3 days in a row. So I would typically run Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, ride the bike on Thursday. Um, and then run on Friday, Saturday, and then ride the bike on Sunday, or some version of that. So I would basically run 3 days in a row, bike, run 2 days in a row, bike again, wash, rinse, repeat. And it really worked out really well, and I had a lot of success with that. Again, the main goal of that being not necessarily geared toward fitness, but injury mitigation, injury prevention. And so, yeah, I get a lot of questions about the bike a lot. Runners reaching out to me saying, do you think I would benefit from the bike? Do you think it's a good idea? I was never a runner who really embraced cross training, at least, when I was in college and even post collegiately for a bit. I really never even thought twice about let's get on the bike, or, that's not the only way to cross train. Obviously, you can use the elliptical or something like that. But I never thought about it. I just wanted to run 7 days a week. And now I look back and think, well, if I would have just had one cross training day maybe per week, I could have saved myself maybe for a lot of injuries and perhaps like performed better. But hindsight is always 2020. But anybody who reaches out to me and says, should I try to start cycling or doing something like that? I think all runners should embrace the bike. You can't just bike and become a better runner, but it can certainly be used as a tool. So it's definitely something I always recommend, and that's kind of been my philosophy for that training and structuring my training. I'm going to move on to sort of the next general topic that I get a lot of questions about, and that is nutrition, and particularly, in particular, supplements. So supplements are always popular. I'm very interested in supplements, while recognizing that it's a very lots of gray area in the world of supplementation. A lot of things that are claimed to work don't, or at least they don't work to the magnitude that they are claimed to work, or work in the ways that they're proposed to work. So I'm always skeptical, obviously, but I think that the way I see it, if you have the discretionary income, if you're willing to try something out for a few months, then I say why not? A lot of supplements are at the very worst useless, and they're not going to harm you if you use them. You're just going to end up spending money on them. So I would, recommend, if you want to play around with supplements, do that. And I've actually brought up all of the the supplements that I use. I actually had to put them in a box to bring them up to my office, but I wanted to show everybody kind of the supplements that I use pretty much every day during training. And I'm not sponsored by any of these supplements, so I'm going to be showing you supplements. I don't get like an affiliate or kickback or anything from them. They're just products that I enjoy. So just wanted to make that note. But I think it would be interesting maybe for today to share some of the supplements that I take every day, as well as why I take them. I'm always getting questions about supplements. So one of the things that I take every day, pretty much every day, maybe 4 or 5 days a week, is whey protein. I will A lot of these supplements that I show you, I combine basically into a giant protein like nutrition shake in the morning. But whey protein, over the summers especially, I started using whey protein a lot as a way to get a meal in after runs in the morning, where hard running in the heat just tends to suppress my appetite a lot. And I didn't like to eat breakfast. And so I would just make this like huge nutrition smoothie, basically. And the momentous whey protein chocolate, it's very good. Whey protein one of the highest quality probably proteins that you can eat. And so I really enjoyed that one. I'll probably make like 20 to 30 grams of that protein. I'll mix that within some almond milk in the morning. Not a huge milk fan, no particular reason, just prefer almond milk. So yeah, I do whey protein, and I'll eat that, have that shake with a meal, have that as a meal replacement in a smoothie sometimes, just depending on kind of the day. But that's something that I tend to take every single day. Another thing that I take every day is this Bloom Greens greens and superfood supplement. It's like a probiotic, a green supplement. I wouldn't call it necessarily a knockoff AG1. I think that it is different in terms of what it has in it. AG1, or so-called athletic greens, as it was formerly known, I guess, is pretty expensive. I don't think everybody needs a green supplement. Oftentimes, I think it's just probably overkill. I'm not sure how much of the greens are actually in there, how much vitamins are actually in there, but I like taking it. I feel good. It's a prebiotic, probiotic, and I feel good taking that. So plus it tastes good. It's like a berry flavor. So I'll take that every day, sometimes mixed in with the smoothie that I make with my whey protein. So the next thing that I have recently added to my lineup is L-glutamine, at the advice and recommendation of Dr. Rhonda Patrick. She's a huge fan of L-glutamine for supporting immune health and digestive health, gut lining health kind of as well. Um, so it does help, like, supposed to help support the immune system. There's some interesting data out there that taking L-glutamine will reduce upper respiratory tract infections among endurance athletes who are particularly prone to upper respiratory tract infections, especially after something like a marathon where you're around a lot of people. Your immune system is suppressed because you've just like run a marathon, so your body's stressed. So this weekend, actually, when we were in Boston, I was taking 10 grams of that stuff a day, twice a day. So 5 grams twice a day for 10 grams, just in the hopes that, I wouldn't get sick. And I haven't gotten sick, but, who's to say if I would have gotten sick otherwise. But yeah, I do the 5 grams of L-glutamine a day. That's a recent addition to the supplement stack for those reasons, the immune health related reasons, and supposed to support, the integrity of kind of the gastrointestinal lining, things like that. Okay, my next supplement, perhaps the most popular supplement that's being talked about these days, creatine monohydrate. So creatine, it's actually something that I've been taking for probably a little over a year now, maybe almost 2 years. I take 5 grams a day of that, sometimes 10 grams per day if I have a particularly hard workout. Um, Creatine, I'm as big of a fan of it as anybody. I think that there's a little bit too much hype almost around it now in terms of the claims that are being made about what it can do for the brain and for muscle health and for muscle growth. Creatine is great. I think that the magnitude of effects, if you really look at the studies, they're not huge, but they are there. And for me, I think that kind of makes sense because creatine almost seems like a free lunch because there are no like downsides to it. No side effects shown in the literature. Up, 5, 10, 15 grams a day. There don't seem to be any negative aspects. And so we shouldn't really expect it to have these crazy magnitude of effects. We should just expect it to give you a little tiny performance boost. And that's, I think, what it does. But the reason that I take it, endurance runners are always reaching out to me asking, should I take creatine? Because for endurance athletes, they typically haven't been advised to sort of take creatine. It's like, oh, well, it might cause me to gain a little bit of weight. There was a study a few years ago that showed um, creatine actually reduced VO2 max during like a 8 week or a 12-week training study, I think. Again, I think that was all related to their water weight gain. So their relative VO2 max went down. But I think the water weight gains don't seem to be that apparent, and there are people saying like they gain 5 to 10 pounds like after taking creatine, and that just doesn't seem right based on what the literature would say, based on how much water weight you gain. I haven't really noticed a difference. Maybe I'm a pound or two heavier with it, but I think any of that water weight gain is offset by kind of the strength gains that you're going to get, the hydration benefits that you're going to get. Your muscles are more hydrated. That's why you are kind of gaining weight in the first place. So creatine is something that I advise, all runners to take. It does seem to, at least in theory and sometimes in practice, have a benefit for recovery, for performance, not just in those high intensity activities, but also for long duration activity. And obviously my performance has gotten better since taking creatine, but I've also been training harder. I take a lot of things, so it's hard to say whether that's due to creatine. But my protocol for that again is I do 5 grams a day, and then on the weekends or on my long run days, I'm gonna take like 10 grams after my workout. All right, so I have a few more here. I promise I don't take hundreds of supplements, but I do take a fair amount. The next one is omega 3. So I take a omega 3 supplement every day. That's just for general kind of cardiovascular health. I mean, I eat not a ton of fish, but maybe once or twice a week I'll have some salmon, maybe some sushi. But I take an omega 3 supplement because I think most people don't probably get enough omega 3 from the diet. And there is some evidence, if I'm purely focusing right now on endurance performance or things like that, that it can help reduce sort of inflammation, muscle soreness, and things like that after particularly hard workouts. So I just take an omega 3 supplement every day for that reason. Something I've recently started taking, probably too recently. I probably should have been supplementing with this for a while, but it's a Thorn Ferrosorb, so it's just an iron supplement. I've had a few blood tests in the past few months, which have shown my ferritin levels are pretty low. So I'm trying to sort of support that and get that up as well. So I've been using that iron supplement. That one's from Thorn. Again, it's called Ferrosorb. I take vitamin D3, kind of another foundational supplement. I do 5,000 IU of that every day. Yes, I do live in Austin, Texas. I do get a lot of sun. I'm outside all the time. But again, I think that most people could probably benefit from vitamin D3. Some blood testing again has shown me recently that I'm kind of on the low side of normal, and so I'd rather that be higher. I could probably afford to 1.5x my levels of vitamin D. So wife and I are both taking vitamin D3. And then the last one I've been taking, something I don't take every day, but is ashwagandha. So that's kind of for both performance. There are some studies out there, there's not a lot of evidence for it, but showing it can enhance endurance exercise performance. And it's also known as an adaptogen. So adaptogen is kind of a fuzzy term, and I'm not sure how much I buy into it, but it's supposed to kind of help you adapt and respond to stress better. So when I take ashwagandha, I don't take it on the weekends. There's some recommendations that you should cycle ashwagandha. So don't take it every single day because that could lead to maybe some cortisol suppression or something like that. So I don't take it on the weekends, and I'll really only take it on days where maybe I did a really hard workout. I'm feeling kind of stressed, overly stressed, whether that's cognitively or physically from my workout. Maybe my heart's feeling a little off or something like that. I'll take ashwagandha. So yeah, I think that's kind of my supplement stack. Again, supplements are like a question I get a lot about. I think even in the Q&A here, I have a few other questions about supplements that people should be taking. In general, everything I take, I feel like has decent evidence toward it. But again, as I said at the beginning of this, I'm not one of those people who says, oh, there needs to be 100%, randomized controlled trial evidence showing that this supplement helps in 100% of people. I'm willing to experiment. If you have the disposable income and the willingness to experiment, I think supplements are worth it. It's kind of fun to play around with them. Are a lot of the effects of them due to the quote unquote placebo effect? Maybe. But even if that's the case, I think they are supporting health and performance. Somehow I've not noticed any negative effects from taking them. I've only experienced positive things. But again, when you have whatever the 10 or so supplements that I do take, it's hard to kind of tell what is actually having an effect and what is not. So I'll wrap up the supplement discussion there, and I'll move on to one more thing related to sort of nutrition that I get questions about a lot. I'm not going to go into sort of what I eat on a day-to-day basis. That could be an entire Q&A in and of itself. So if you'd be interested in that, maybe let me know. I think that could kind of be fun to do. Um, I'm not too diligent about tracking my nutrition, but I am conscious and conscientious, obviously, about like what I eat and how I fuel. But a question I get a lot is, how do you fuel long runs? How do you fuel your general training runs from day to day? And that's actually something that I've changed a lot in these last few training blocks. I talk with my wife a lot about this because she's a runner as well, and we were like, man, 10 years ago when we were running and training on a track club, in Gainesville, Florida, we would just go out and do like 20-mile long runs, and I'd hydrate a little bit, but I would not even think twice about fueling. I don't think I had a gel on a run until I was like 28 years old, probably just in the last few years. I mean, I just think back to like my college days and stuff, doing these workouts and these runs with literally zero fueling. And it's incredible to just think how much better I probably could have performed and recovered had I been fueling adequately. So I've really been experimenting this training block with one, eating a little bit of something before I head out the door in the morning. I don't like to eat a full breakfast, and when you're running at 6 or 7 a.m., it really is hard to. So I'll have something like a nutrition bar, something like 150 to 300 calories, 30 to 45 minutes before I head out the door. It's easy on the stomach, and it's going to kind of allow you to, have some energy, exogenous energy sources throughout that run. Could I do those runs fasted? Of course. I mean, I've trained fasted for my entire life mostly. And I feel fine doing it. When you're fat adapted, when you train a lot and have a long training history, you're able to do that. But in my mind, is it optimal was kind of becoming my question, especially when I'm pushing these higher miles, training 12, 13, 14, 15 hours a week. Recovery then becomes an important part of the equation. And I think doing fasted training inherently kind of reduces your capacity to come back day after day and perform hard training. So I have been fueling runs better in terms of eating beforehand and then even fueling during. So I've become a fan of the energy gels, and I don't use them liberally. I use them sort of as needed. So if a run is going to be over 90 minutes, I'll typically take one or two gels during that run, about every 30 minutes. During long runs, I'll sort of do the same thing, but maybe be more aggressive in my fueling strategy. So, an energy gel, 20 ish grams of carbohydrate every 20 to 30 minutes. And the benefits that I've seen from that, sort of the return on investment, has been enormous, not just during the workout. And I think that's often where we tend to, obviously, our main focus is like, does taking in carbs improve my performance during the run? I think the answer there is inevitably yes. But something else that we don't often think about, and maybe I'll discuss this in the Q&A. I had a question, kind of a tongue-in-cheek question about carbohydrates and how much they're harming me from my marathon. I'll discuss that maybe in a little bit. But I think one area where we don't think about where carbs are beneficial during training is then promoting recovery from training. Because the way I see it, if you're, the less energy deficit that you're going into during the run, kind of the bigger, more shallow of a hole, I guess, you have to dig yourself out of after that run. So by not putting myself in this massive energy deficit by running fasted or with zero fuel, I'm ending this workout a lot better off than I would be otherwise. And again, I'm not fueling, I think, in excess. If anything, I'm probably under fueling a lot of these runs, but just adding that extra 20 to 40 grams of carbohydrate every 30 to 40 minutes, I think makes a massive difference. So I did bring up sort of a selection of gels that I've been using throughout training. These are actually what I used to fuel during the Boston Marathon on Monday. One of my favorites has been the Science and Sport Beta Fuel gel. So these actually contain 40 grams of carbohydrates in a single gel, which is great because it's basically two of your more traditional energy gels squeezed into one gel. So you can kind of get away with carrying a few less gels, or it sort of just allows you to fuel at a higher rate without carrying, 12 gels in a marathon. You can carry 5 or 6 instead. So I use the Beta Fuel gel, and then this other Science and Sport gel is an electrolyte one that just has 20 grams of carbohydrates. It's a raspberry flavor. And these are maltodextrin, so they differ a little bit in their what kind of sugar they are compared to some of the other gels. I tend to like it a lot. These actually have the consistency of like water, and you don't even need to take it with water. So some of those gels, if anybody watching has ever taken a goo during a run, you automatically get the driest mouth like you've ever had, and you need to feel like you need to chug water. These almost feel like water to me, and I almost feel like they're hydrating me at the same time. So I really enjoy those Beta Fuel gels, and I've been using them. They're somewhat also, pretty inexpensive compared to something like a Morton gel, which are also great, but they are very expensive. I actually have this one left over from Boston. I took one on the course, but never ended up using it. So got $5 off of my entry fee by taking one of these gels. But the Morton, they're very popular. They're very effective. They use a different hydrogel technology. That's something I like to train with as well. The only problem with those is that you kind of tend to have to chew it a little bit. And when you're running, 5-minute mile pace, that can become kind of hard. But I do enjoy the Morton gels. And then finally, my wife actually turned me on to these Goo Liquid Energy. So this is literally kind of like water. It tastes like lemonade. Has 20 grams of carbs in there. Again, the consistency of it means it sits pretty well in your stomach. I think I actually had two of those during the Boston Marathon. So those are kind of the three brands that I've been using. Those are what I use to train with. I also use a brand called it's the Huma energy gels. They are like a chia based energy gel. I like those a lot, and I've been using them as like a more natural option, kind of during training. But yeah, so when I get questions about that, like how do I fuel runs and is training fasted okay? I mean, I think energy gels are just a great invention, I guess, if you want to call it, for runners who don't necessarily like to fuel with whole foods, which can sometimes be hard. So I say embrace them and do some gut training before it. Obviously, I mean, I've coached a few people also along with my own training during this block, and we've been working on kind of aiming for a higher carbohydrate intake. And that you can't just do that right off the bat. You have to train yourself up to maybe just doing, 20 to 40 grams per hour to 40 to 50, and then maybe 60 plus grams per hour. And that's something I've been working on as well to sort of mitigate that gastrointestinal distress. So yeah, the fueling has been a major thing. That's something major that I've changed over the past block. Experienced a lot of success with it, and something that I continue to get questions about. So again, I think if I was going to do another Q&A soon, maybe I'll do one just like solely related to nutrition, not just maybe during training, but also, what do you eat after runs? How do you just fuel your day to day? What does my overall diet look like? I think, I could talk about that for hours, so I will leave that for another day. So those were the two kind of broader topics that I wanted to talk about. And now I'm going to move on to the questions that I received before I started the live stream. And then I believe I have some questions that people have actually asked since I've started the live stream. So I will try to scroll back and find those so we could potentially cover some questions live, which I think would be a lot of fun. So if you have a question and you would like me to answer it, you can go ahead and put that in the little write message box below, and I'll try to get to those depending on how long these other questions last me. All right, so the first question here, I got names for some of them, not for all of them, but I will not say last names just to keep people anonymous. So Joshua, he asks, I'm curious if you have experiences with low blood sugar or feelings of low blood sugar, bonking or lightheadedness during training or after training. Do you ever experience this? Any insights from your recent CGM use? It's interesting that he asked this question because the answer to that is actually yes, and it's something that I had never experienced before. Perhaps because I'd never really fueled or eaten anything before exercise before. So a few months ago, I actually started eating just an energy bar about 30 minutes before I started my runs. And what I was noticing was that about 3 miles in, so between 3 and 4 miles, I would sort of start feeling this tingly kind of sensation in like my chest area, and my head would again, I would feel a little bit lightheaded. And so I was like, what is going on? Like, this is weird. It's happening at the same point in exercise every day. I'm not usually used to experiencing this. And I would feel fine. I would feel, the run would be strong. And eventually that would like subside, which was another weird thing. And so for like a couple weeks, I had no idea like what was going on. I couldn't understand, like why I was feeling this lightheadedness, what could be contributing to it. And then I started using, because I received one in the mail, a continuous glucose monitor. And after doing a few runs with that continuous glucose monitor, I immediately realized what the heck was going on. And what was happening was something called reactive hypoglycemia. So essentially, I was eating the nutrition bar before I started my run. That was leading to an increase in blood glucose. And basically, at the timing, I would start my run 30 minutes after eating that. So at about 3 miles or 45 to 60 minutes after eating that bar, my blood glucose would kind of try to start to come down due to that insulin response, while at the same time, my body was trying to liberate blood glucose or glycogen to increase my blood glucose because I had started exercising. So there were sort of these two competing processes occurring. And when that happens, your blood sugar dips. So I was basically getting this blood sugar dip from having that bar that was occurring and then exercising, both of which were kind of reducing my blood glucose before my body was able to kick in and start to increase my blood glucose by releasing liver glycogen. And so that CGM was like super insightful there. And because of that, I actually made a change and started eating longer before I headed out for that run. or shorter. So I was actually doing it at like the most inopportune time, 30 minutes beforehand. So ideally 45 to 60 minutes, I would have kind of finished eating that. So when I started the run, I sort of wouldn't be getting that insulin response from eating the bar. Another way to do it would be to just have that bar 15 to 20 minutes before going out and then kind of fueling adequately during the run so as to prevent blood sugar from dipping like that. But this reactive hypoglycemia thing was kind of interesting. I obviously heard of it, but I had never experienced it. And the insights I got from the CGM told me what was happening, and I've modified my fueling strategy because of that. So it was kind of a very interesting, I won't call it an experiment, but it was interesting experience for me. The next question is from Emma. This is kind of on just some like coaching guidance and returning to run. So I've only been running for a couple of years, but I've been given the opportunity to run with a charity that's close to my heart in the London Marathon. I was supposed to be this year, but I had to defer it due to a posterior tibial tendon injury. Just wondering what your advice would be for returning to running after a couple of months of only cross training due to injury, and for how to approach training over the next year to help me get ready for my first marathon. This is kind of actually a question that I get a lot. So this wasn't the first time I've sort of gotten this question. What I always say to either newer runners or runners returning from injury, no matter what your experience level is, whether you're an elite runner or somebody who's only been running for a few years, do not be afraid to walk run. I do it all the time if I'm coming back from an injury. And basically, what that means is just like if I'm coming back from a long period of no running, I will go out, I'll run for a few minutes, I'll walk for a few minutes, and I'll just repeat that. And what I'll do gradually is then, increase the amount of time that I'm running, reduce the time that I spent walking, or just increase the time that I spent running. And eventually you're going to get to a point where you can run for 10 minutes straight, 20 minutes straight, 30 minutes straight, and then you'll just reach a point where you can run continuously. I think the run walk, it's kind of liberating because it's not intimidating at first. You say, "Oh, I only have to run for 3 minutes at a time, and then I can walk for however long I want to, until I recover, until my heart rate comes down, until I feel better, my muscular system feels better." And walking is sort of like free fitness. So, you can go out for 2 hours and walk a lot, but just run some of that and you'll, have that heart rate elevation, build your aerobic base on top of it. So, my advice to Emma and anybody else returning from an injury, embrace walk running. Um, I think it's a great way to return from an injury, from just some unplanned downtime or planned downtime. I just think that you don't need to have too much pride. You can sacrifice your pride a little bit and do walk run. Like I said, I've done it plenty in the past few years when I've been coming back from an injury, doing the walk run, and I've had a lot of success doing that. The next question is from Anthony. He says, during your build for Boston, how many days did you usually hop on the bike, and do you feel like that helps significantly with your aerobic base? This will be a short answer because I sort of just talked about that at the beginning of this Q&A. But I would be on the bike 2 days per week during my build for Boston. And those 2 days were days when I didn't run. So I wasn't like I was running on one day and biking on the same day. Biking served as my recovery day. There were weeks, if I did a down week of running, I would only run 4 days per week and ride the bike three. There were some days where I would just add another bike workout to my week. So 5 runs and 3 bikes. But most often it was 2 days per week. And the answer to his second question, do I feel like that contributed to my aerobic base? The answer to that would be yes, definitely. Help me improve and maintain my aerobic base while also, not having to run 2 extra days per week and get sort of the pounding and the damage from that, which I think, allowed me to reduce my injury risk. The next question, what do you think about nitrate supplements for training and racing? So yeah, so nitrates. Nitrates are a supplement that have a lot of evidence on them. I think, in terms of like performance enhancing supplements, there's probably more evidence for nitrates or, in the form of beetroot juice than anything else. And overall, they seem to be incredibly effective. They enhance nitric oxide production, which helps with vasodilation and then helps with blood flow. So the only caveat there is like they tend to only help people who have a low exercise capacity. So, for instance, older adults or people with heart failure or people with coronary heart disease or peripheral artery disease. Most of the evidence sort of shows that. If you give those people who have kind of a reduced ability to distribute blood distribute oxygen to their working muscles. You give them nitrate supplements, you give them beetroot juice, their exercise performance goes way up because they're sort of compromised at rest. The evidence for them improving performance for trained individuals is definitely a lot less strong than it is for like the clinical populations. So I don't use them, not for that reason. It's like just something that I've never really experienced or experimented with. I'm also really just not sold that they would improve my performance personally, and that's not to discourage anyone else from using them. So this kind of goes back to the thing about like creatine. They're incredibly safe. They're not super expensive. There are no downsides to it. And they probably have other benefits for cardiovascular health. They like improve endothelial function and can help with blood pressure. So I think that like if you wanted to take a nitrate supplement every day, go for it. Like they have beetroot juice shots and things like that. But they also work acutely, so it's not something you have to take every day. You could just take it before, say, a high intensity workout or before a marathon race. So I'm definitely all for them. The evidence would be there to support it. Again, I think it's a little bit more compelling for people who might have some sort of cardiovascular disorder, who they undoubtedly improve performance for. But I think just for the general public, I think they definitely probably help. I think the more trained you are, the less they probably help, but definitely a supplement I would probably endorse. All right, so the next question, someone is asking a question about warm-ups. So for warm-ups, some say you should stick to dynamic stretching and use the first few miles of the race to warm up. Some say to do some easy running first. How do you usually do it? I tend to try whatever gets me warm with the least amount of energy expenditure. So the first method. Yeah, warm-ups, warm-ups are something that are, like, highly individual. So I'll talk about what I do, um, and then kind of caveat that with the fact that I don't think everybody should probably do that approach. So I tend to not only want, but need a very, very, very extensive warm-up. I think if you're someone who has followed my training, whether you've been looking at my Boston training log or you follow me on X and have seen the training I post there, you'll see that for most of my runs or my workouts, I guess rather, I will do like a 4 to 6 mile warm up. So 30 to 45 minutes of easy running with some hard components there too before I ever start doing something more intense. Now, 4 to 6 miles, that might be the extent of somebody else's workout. So I'm not saying everybody needs to warm up for 30 to 45 minutes before they get into their hard workout. The younger me didn't necessarily need that much of a warm up. When you're 18, you can roll out of bed and just put your shoes on, cruise out the door in 10 minutes and be ready to roll. But unfortunately, I'm not 18 anymore. So my warm ups tend to be, some would say overkill, but I think that once you reach a certain level of training and you've just logged so many miles over the years, a 5 to 6 mile easy warm up is kind of what you need, and it's not going to really take anything out of you. I mean, if I look at my performance after I do any of those warm ups, it's great. Like I don't feel fatigued when I'm starting a race, even though I've done 30 to 45 minutes of warming up. So, in my opinion, more is better. That's just what I found in my experience. But I do think that we think of warm ups, you don't want to tire yourself out, so you want to avoid doing something intense. And I think this relates to the dynamic warm up component of this question, but do something hard, do some plyometrics, do 90 seconds to 3 minutes at race pace effort. I try to run for 3 to 5 minutes at like a race pace effort before I even start the race because you don't want, essentially, what you don't want is those first few miles of the race to be a warm up. If you're doing a marathon, fine. You have 26 miles to get back on track. But if you're racing a 5K or a 10K or a half marathon, the moment you start, you want to be warm at the starting line. Ideally, you go from your warm up right into the race and your heart rate's kind of still elevated when that gun goes off. With how the races work, sometimes you're standing around in a corral for a few minutes, so you really just can't do it. Um, but you want to be warmed up when you start the race. That's the point. It's a warm up. So you don't want it to be a shock to your system when you start the race. You want to have kind of put your body through at least some hard running or cycling. This applies to all endurance sports before the race actually starts. So yes, that involves easy running, but yes, dynamics, high knees, butt kicks, plyometrics, things like that can definitely be super beneficial. If you are concerned about not making yourself too tired, not expending a lot of energy, then yeah, go for something short and hard. Just do a few sprints in the parking lot or something like that. That can work as well. But again, my approach tends to be I want to feel like I'm completely warmed up, ready to go. I've turned my legs over, got my heart rate up before I tried to do anything intense. So that's sort of my philosophy on warming up. The next question, what are your thoughts on weightlifting or eccentric loading to resist muscle fatigue or damage late in the marathon, especially versus just running more and running more hilly routes? I think doing both is best, but finding balance can be hard. Yeah, so if I had to fix one thing about my preparation for the Boston Marathon, it would have been doing more downhill specific work because man, what I found during that race, and you obviously are warned of this, but it wasn't the uphill portions that got me. It was the muscle soreness and the muscle damage that I got in my quads from all of that downhill running. With about 10K to go, I was just wrecked and couldn't run any faster. And so I think that doing eccentric load training, whether that's downhill specific running or some sort of eccentric training in the gym, I think that would have paid dividends and sort of helped me improve my performance on race day. So I definitely think that's helpful for people who are training for a race with a lot of downhills, or just in general. It's going to make your legs stronger. So yeah, big fan. I think eccentric loading, it would certainly help with fatigue and damage late in the marathon, and it's certainly something that I'm going to learn from this previous marathon experience and apply to my training for subsequent marathons for sure. So this next question, this was the tongue-in-cheek question that I mentioned earlier. So this person asks, what kind of havoc have all those extra carbs you consumed during your marathon wreaked on your system? How are you managing to go on? So yeah, this refers to a post I had posted about my fueling strategy for the Boston Marathon, and Professor Timothy Noakes. For people who aren't familiar, he is an exercise scientist, I believe, wrote a popular book called The Lore of Running, a big figure in the endurance running community, now a big figure in the low carb community. So he loves to comment on my posts and other people's posts about how you're eating too many carbs and you're going to develop diabetes. And so he responded to my post and said, where do all those carbs go? How can you tell if you even oxidize those carbs? Essentially, what this is meaning is that he's claiming that if you're eating more than 60 grams of carbs per hour, your body can't digest it. So when you end the race, there's probably some undigested carbohydrate in there that you didn't use. And I think the logical extension of his claim is that we're overfueling, and yes, that's going to eventually lead to hyperinsulinemia, and you're going to develop metabolic disorders. So all a bit hyperbolic on his end for sure. And so I do have some thoughts on that though, and I talked about them on X. I think it's just really to kind of generalize what someone fuels with during a marathon to the risk of developing a metabolic disorder, or to generalize that to their diet that they're consuming day to day, I think is just kind of silly. I mean, sure, maybe I overfueled on marathon race day. One, I don't think that we have enough evidence to claim that. I did consume 80 grams of carbohydrates per hour. Maybe I'm not using all that fuel. But my kind of counter to him was, what is the downside? So yes, if you overfuel, you could lead that could lead to GI distress. So you may have to take an extra bathroom break during the race. I didn't. I tolerated that fine. You spend a little bit of extra money on gels, especially if you're using something like Morton gels that tend to be pretty expensive. But other than that, there really is no downside to it. And if you're experiencing better performance than ever, as I am, I'm racing faster and better than ever, as are most athletes who are kind of trying this high carb fueling. It doesn't seem that the extra carbohydrates are doing anything bad. Yeah, if you do every training run, if you suck down 8 to 10 gels on every single training run, or overfueling on training runs and eating gels for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, that's not good. Obviously, nobody would argue that that's good. And, there are probably professional athletes who do that, but nobody's arguing that that is the optimal thing to do. And I certainly don't do that. I run a few marathons per year where I will fuel like I did on Monday during the Boston Marathon. Other than that, my fueling is, I eat a whole food diet. I don't, overeat sugar. I'm very conscientious of what I eat. And so I just think to look at to take his post and look at that and say like, oh, this is harmful for you. It's not really an argument. I mean, I enjoy engaging in it because it's like a scientific discussion, I think. But to a point, it just seems kind of like fear mongering. So again, that's all I'll address about that question. I think if I do a nutrition related Q&A, it would be interesting to sort of explore that concept in more detail. But you know, in general, I just think that there's this kind of controversy lately, not controversy, but one of the athletes, Lionel Sanders, he's a professional triathlete. He kind of came out and said that he had pre-diabetes. He got a blood test that showed he had pre-diabetes. And so this started this whole conversation about, is high level performance healthy? I know Zach Bitter, I think he's on this as well. So hi, Zach. But Zach did a podcast on this, I think, about like, is high performance healthy? Can you be healthy and perform high? A lot of high performing athletes don't fuel adequately. They do eat too much sugar. And then later down the line, they say, oh, I fueled poorly and this is why I developed diabetes. I think Noakes himself, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if he has diabetes, but he's certainly experienced some metabolic issues in the past. And I think he attributes that to fueling too high carb during his running days and whatever. So all these stories are anecdotal though, in my opinion. And sure, metabolic diseases are rampant, not just among healthy people, but maybe also among athletes, recreational exercisers. But we need to be careful when we're extrapolating this data to individual people who we just met on the internet and don't really know. So that's just my 2 cents on that. And last question here, at least the last question that I received, kind of pre on air. So far, the marathon doesn't seem to have affected you. Your posts show no signs of stress. Maybe you have a high threshold of pain tolerance for the mind as well as the body. Do you attribute this to race day nutrition? Well, so the race didn't seem to have affected me. I assume he's speaking of the Boston Marathon, but trust me, I'm still experiencing some massive delayed onset muscle soreness. And I think just today was kind of when I started to get back my like mental clarity and sort of feel not so sluggish. Maybe that's my brain myelin coming back and recovering. For those who don't know, I posted a study on X the other day. It showed that like your myelin content in the brain is reduced for 2 weeks after a marathon or something like that. So if you're feeling a little bit dumb and you did race a marathon recently, then that's kind of your excuse. But related to the other question, I mean, yeah, sure, it's 4 days out for the marathon. I feel fine now. I could probably go out for a run today or tomorrow, but I'll probably continue to take like a week or so off and just do some cycling, some sauna, some swimming. That's typically my protocol. I don't have a race coming up soon, so I tend to err on the side of caution, over recover versus get back into running too soon. Just give myself time to rest. I think though, regarding the race day nutrition aspect, I talked about this before, but I do think that that plays a major role. I fueled adequately like during the race, and I experienced the same thing for my long runs during my training block. Where if you fuel adequately during the run, you just feel so much better the next day. It's night and day compared to doing a run fasted with low levels of electrolytes and not enough fuel versus hydrating properly, getting electrolytes in, and getting enough carbs in it. It's night and day in terms of how you feel. So obviously a marathon wrecks you. No way around that. But eating well, during, and then I tried to eat well afterwards. Sometimes your appetite is a little bit suppressed after a race. But yeah, race day nutrition definitely plays a role in terms of enhancing your recovery. I tried to do all the right things. I had a protein shake, some extra creatine that day. So I was doing all the things that I could. But you're gonna feel bad for a few weeks after, and there's nothing wrong with that. Okay, so that ends the questions that I received offline. And so I'm going to try to scroll up through the chat here because I did have some questions that audience members were asking. So I'm going to try to scroll to the top and answer as many of these as I can. Again, thanks everybody while I find these questions. Thanks everybody for joining. I think this is a lot of fun. I hope to do this more often. The Substack Live platform is pretty cool. This is my first time doing it, and I'm sure that there will be a recording to post afterwards. But this was a lot of fun. So I appreciate all 60 of you who are on here, no matter when you joined. Okay, so Ricky, hi Ricky. Ricky's in here. He asks, bike as a way to increase workout load without increasing damage, or even if your running mileage is not fully maxed out? Oh, that's a great question. So I think the question is, do you only resort to the bike once you max out your running mileage, or are you kind of using that maybe as a supplement or a replacement for mileage? I think that the answer there would be both. I mean, at this point, on 5 days of running per week, I really do feel as if I've maxed out, quote unquote, my running mileage, at least to my body's capacity right now. So the bike is sort of replacing, I would ideally, running 90 to 100 miles a week. The bike is sort of replacing those extra 20 to 30 miles that I'm not running. So yes, it's a way to increase my workload without leading to damage. It's also a way I think like when I'm getting back into fitness to sort of just um instead of add more running, I'm just going to do more biking. So, keep my running the same, even if I'm not running as much as I would want to, but do more biking instead. So it kind of serves two purposes there. Thanks for the question, Ricky. The next question, Zach Bitter, he asks, I'm really interested in the digestive aspect of L-glutamine. I usually take 5 grams per day. Yeah, that one, I'm more aware of the immune health type of stuff, but sorry, my camera's moving around a little bit here. The digestive stuff, I think I was just reading like a few weeks ago, L-glutamine to support maybe not actual digestion, but to support kind of the integrity and the strength of the gastrointestinal lining. So maybe reducing things like leaky gut or gut permeability that are experienced during endurance running. I actually a few weeks ago was experiencing just some real bad, without TMI, just like real bad digestive issues. Was not feeling too good, and so I started taking glutamine because of that. It could have been things that I was eating, and I altered my diet a little bit as well. So it's hard to say if it was working, but the proposed mechanism is there's that the amino acids in glutamine are supporting gut lining integrity, helping strengthening the gut barrier, and are going to sort of reduce some of that gastrointestinal distress, that leaky gut. I think primarily too that occurs in the heat, exercising in the heat. So Zach, I know you're here in Austin too, and taking it before the summer. I think I'll be interested to see whether that has any sort of subjective effects on how I feel my digestive system handles sort of running in the heat. It always tends to be wrecked. I never tend to have an appetite, so I'm kind of curious to see if L-glutamine will help there. I may actually up my dose to 10 grams per day, 5 to 10 grams. So maybe do that 5 grams twice a day as opposed to just the 5 grams right now. So we shall see. That's an experiment in progress. All right. So Mario asks or says, I believe people worry too much about supplements and not enough about the big rocks that will move the performance needle. Yeah, Mario, I totally agree. I think that kind of the framework about supplements should sort of be take care of those big rocks, those big pillars, like you said. Make sure you're sleeping right. Make sure you're eating right. Make sure you're training. But I also then feel like there's sort of this, there's like a downplaying of supplements almost. I'll see a lot of people on social media say, like, oh, you don't need supplements. You just need to train and eat right and sleep and you'll be fine. I would kind of disagree with that. I just think that high performing athletes, whether, no matter how much you're training, but if you're exercising or you're trying to push your body to a high level, I think that supplements can just play such an important role because, yeah, most people, if you're working a desk job and working out 5 days a week for 30 minutes a day, not to say that there's anything wrong with that, but you might not be asking that much of your body. Most people in today's society aren't. But if you are asking a lot of your body, you have a full time job, you're raising children, and you're also trying to train 15 to 20 hours a week. Yeah, you probably should and could be taking supplements if you want your body to perform at its top level. And that's sort of my framework about it. You're not necessarily looking to correct a deficiency, although I think a lot of us do have probably deficiencies that we could take care of. But you're also just trying to optimize. I mean, optimize your levels of vitamin D, omega 3, so that you can perform, so that you can recover. I think all of that comes into play when you're really just trying to push your body. I really don't think that you can get everything that you need from diet. That's just plain and simple. Unless you're eating, 10,000 calories a day, I really do think that it's hard. And so, I showed everybody the supplements that I take when we started this, and for a good reason. I think a lot of them, one, you can't get enough from the diet, and two, or any from the diet, and two, these things can help. There are certain things that I take as well that aren't even contained in food, like the green supplement, for instance, or like ashwagandha. Those things can help, and they can be sort of performance enhancing supplements, and I really do think that they can play a role. But again, Mario, I think I'll agree with you in that, yeah, we focus a lot. We expect too much from supplements sometimes. They are not going to replace proper sleep or adequate training, but I think that they can really support it for people who are kind of like trying to push their body day in and day out. All right, let's see if I have any more questions here. Jess, hi Jess. Jess asks, do you lift after intervals and long runs? Or she says, you lift after intervals and long runs, right? How long after? Do you have the discipline to do it after hard? How do you have the discipline to do it after hard runs? Yeah, that's a great question. The implementing strength training has been an interesting experiment this training block. So you have to be very strategic about it. So I do find that doing a lifting session on an interval day or on a long run day or the day after a long run is best for me because I don't want to do it the day before a long run and I don't want to really do it a day or two before intervals. So that gives me, if I'm not doing it on the interval day or doing it on the long run day, which I am often not because after a long run day, you're already running for 3 hours. My wife doesn't want me to go to the gym for another 2 hours, and I want to spend time with my family as well. So you can only spend so much time exercising. I'm not a professional athlete. So that gives me like 3 days per week to actually fit in my lift. And so this training block, I did my lift on Sunday after my long run. And then I would try to do some sort of strength training on an interval day. Again, those can take a lot out of you. So it is kind of hard to, I wouldn't say find the discipline, but sometimes you just don't feel like it. And oftentimes I would only be going into the gym 1 day per week to lift, and that would be on Sunday. So Sunday was really my strategic day where I would run 7 miles easy on Sunday. I would go to the gym, I would get in my hour lift, and I would go in the sauna. That just kind of worked out logistically for me. Um, but I would recommend again doing it on a long run or an interval day. As hard as that might seem, like you pointed out, Jess, like you don't want to do it. It's hard, you're tired. But if you want to perform well, and I do it after those sessions, obviously, not beforehand. If you want to perform well on those sessions and don't really have other times during the week to do it, and you want to be fresh for your long run and your interval workout, sometimes you just have to fit that on the same day. Just really crush your legs that day and then just recover. I think that would kind of be the framework there. Um, in terms of how long to wait, I don't really wait. So if I'm doing a lift after a run, I'll just finish the run and immediately go to lift. Bring something to eat, bring some hydration if you need to. But yeah, I would just do it right after you're warm. It kind of feels good, so you don't really feel the need to do like a lifting specific warm up. That's kind of my philosophy there. All right, Steven. Hi, Steven. Steven asks, how should a quote slow marathoner adapt your training approach? Since my marathon duration is much longer than yours, around 4 hours, would you recommend more hours per week of training? Yeah, that's a great question. In terms of hours per week of training, I would say no. I would say though that your long run should probably be longer in duration though than my long runs. So I don't think you have to run more hours per week than I do. Right now probably running 8 to 10 hours per week, depending on how long, how many miles I'm getting that week. I don't think just because you're running a longer marathon, you need to run more than 8 to 10 hours per week. You can run a solid marathon on 3 to 4 hours, 3 to 5 hours per week of training. But yeah, your long run should be longer than mine probably. So I think my max long run during this training block was 2 hours and 45 minutes, something like that, maybe 24 miles if I remember it correctly. Yours, it should probably be 3 to 3.5 hours. I don't think you need to do a full 4 hour long run, but 3 to 3.5 hours, regardless of your total weekly duration. So I think that no, don't adapt my approach to run more during the week. You could follow the same structure. Say if you want to run 5 days per week, whatever, keep the training volume the same or do whatever your training volume is, and then just do that long run during the week and make it 3.5 hours. You could even do back-to-back long runs. That's kind of a popular approach sometimes, where maybe you don't want to do 3.5 hours once on the weekend, but maybe you run for 2.5 hours one day and 2 hours the next. So you're kind of getting Saturday and Sunday back to back. You're going to build a lot of that strength, a lot of that endurance, to prepare yourself for being out there for 4 hours. Okay, I'm just checking here to see if I have any more questions. Dr. Kois, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. Apologies if not. They ask, what's your approach to getting back into training after a sickness? Or do you have an approach altering training to avoid sickness? Yeah. I wish I had an approach to train that I could avoid sickness. Since we started putting our son into school, into daycare, it seems almost impossible to avoid sickness. But again, that's the reason for the L-glutamine kind of introduction into my training routine. So I think returning from illness, I mean, slow and steady. It obviously depends on the severity of the illness, what it was. If you had to take a week off and you were sick for the entire week, I would say focus on intensity more than volume. That's what I tend to do. So, and I guess what I mean by that is go, do as much volume as you want, but keep it at a lower intensity. Because often, if you go out for a walk, if you go out for an easy bike ride, that all tends to be fine. Yeah, after like an illness, at least in my experience, when you try doing the high intensity stuff, that's just when you feel like, oh, I feel terrible. I feel run down. If it was like a respiratory infection or a head cold, you just feel really bad. So I would say gradually reintroduce the volume and progressively build that up over a few weeks, and then try to reintroduce some intensity. That would kind of be my best approach. In terms of training to reduce illness, if you find some way to do that, please let me know. I currently don't have a protocol. My protocol is typically, I guess if you know that you're exposed and you're feeling illness come on, maybe take your training down a little bit if you think that's going to help. But yeah, I don't actually have a good approach, I think, to avoiding sickness during training. Doing some of the supplement stuff, washing your hands. I don't know. That's the general stuff you would do to avoid sickness while not training. I think would also help you during training. So that would be my advice there. Ricky says, respect to people who still lift heavy weights while being active runners. I gave up on squats after taking running seriously. LOL. Yeah, I think strength training is still something that I don't have down perfectly. Trust me. I think when I started my Boston training block, I was all about, okay, I'm doing 2 days of lifting per week, hands down, no excuses. And then by week 2 or 3 of my training program, it was, okay, we're going to do 1 day of lifting per week. And that means, what I mean by that is lifting in the gym. So I would make 1 day per week, no excuses. I'm in the gym. I'm either doing a squat, a deadlift, or a RDL, and then doing some upper body stuff. I found that that was sustainable. It was enjoyable, and it improved my strength too. I do try to do strength training 2 to 3 more days per week, though. I wouldn't call it heavy lifting. It's more body weight type stuff. So at home, kind of up in my office, down in the garage, I have kettlebells. I have a Nordic curl kind of machine. What else do I have? I have a pull-up bar. So I'll basically do body weight type stuff throughout the week. I'll try to do that once, maybe twice per week. Bulgarian split squats, kettlebell swings, anything that I can do with a kettlebell, because that's kind of all I have. I'll try to do that a few times per week as well. I really just find that that is a fine maintenance strength strategy. Yeah, I'm not going to be setting deadlift world records doing that, but it does allow me to sort of maintain my strength, even build some strength. I think I got stronger during this training block, as well as faster. So that I'll do a couple days per week. But yeah, to Ricky's point, it does become hard when you're running to a certain point. It just becomes hard to do all that extra strength training. And it does require a dedication and scheduling for sure. All right. So looks like that's all the questions. I appreciate those of you who not only hopped in here, but sort of submitted your questions into the chat. I wasn't actually even sure if Substack had that feature or not. So it's good to know that people can submit questions while we go on. And I think that was a fun feature, and we were able to get a few more questions in there. So we're at about an hour right now, and so I think I'll probably go ahead and end this Q&A. I would definitely love to do more of these. And if you all have any feedback that you want to send me afterwards, please let me know. But this was a lot of fun. I wish I were able to kind of like see everybody and interact with everybody, but I guess that's not how this works. But I appreciate that, you guys are interested in this stuff. I think one of the more fun things about this Boston training block and previous marathon training blocks, and hopefully future marathon training blocks, is experimenting with stuff that works for me, both with training and nutrition, but then sharing it with people. I'm always like completely surprised that there are people who kind of care so much about like what I'm doing and are interested in it. But I love it. I mean, I love that hopefully people are learning something from it. I think it's fun to share regardless of if I'm just shooting things into the void. But based on the responses and stuff, like, it doesn't appear to be so. It appears that people are interested in the training, and so I appreciate those of you who are, and I'm happy to share it with you, and I'm glad I get to share that with you. I think it's awesome that I was able to do that. So thanks for joining this Q&A session. I will hope to do more of these in the future, perhaps more honed in on specific topics, maybe more broad like they were today, as I just collect questions that I get from my audience. So yeah, with that, I will sign off, and hope everyone has a great weekend, and I'll see you next time, whether it's on Substack or X or maybe even in real life. That happens sometimes. Have a happy Friday, everybody.